China has been the world's factory for the last 3 decades, but as geopolitical tensions rise, Western media is predicting more countries will decouple from China and eventually turn to countries like India for overseas manufacturing. But can India replicate in the next 30 years what China has done in the past 30 years? While India certainly has potential, China still holds a strategic advantage over India and every other country for that matter. In this video, let's take a look at the major reasons why India or any other country won't overtake China as the world's factory, and why Chinese manufacturing will continue to be a staple for the future of our world. The number one problem with India is the lack of essential infrastructure. India severely lags behind China in basic things such as electricity, roads, railways, and seaports. India and China's population is nearly identical, but China produces 4 times the amount of electricity as India. Bangalore, the Silicon Valley of India, has numerous power outages every day, and then there are problems related to transportation, which affects the entire supply chain. There are only 4,000 kilometers of proper expressways. Compare that to the over 170,000 kilometers of expressways in China. In addition, freight trains in India travel at an average speed of only 25 kilometers an hour. Though these problems are being looked into and resolved faster than earlier decades, it still lags far behind China in comparison. No matter what the Western media propagates, one thing we must remember is that China still dominates the traditional manufacturing sector. For example, steel and cement production, the 2 industries that are vital for future economic growth. China dominates the world's steel market, manufacturing 10 times more than India, who is the world's second largest producer. It's a similar story with cement, with China producing 8 times as much as India, who once again is the world's second largest producer. China's manufacturing is currently 10 times larger than India's. In 2022, China's manufacturing accounted for $5 trillion, while India's manufacturing amounted to only $450 billion. What this means is that if we move just 10% of China's manufacturing capacity, it will double India's present capacity. So, will it be easy for India to double its manufacturing? Well, in 2009, India's manufacturing was $230 billion, and it took the Indian government 13 years to double the capacity to its current rate. So even if India's manufacturing grows twice as fast as before, it would take about 6 to 7 years for India to steal just 10% of China's manufacturing. This is because India focused too much on software and IT services over the last 3 decades, and neglected the manufacturing sector. Right now, India's share of global manufacturing is less than 3%, while China's share is more than 30%. This chart shows how both China and India have grown their manufacturing outputs. Notice how China's share of global manufacturing was only 8.7% in 2004, but surpassed 30% in 2022. Meanwhile, India's manufacturing has largely remained stagnant over the past 20 years with little growth. Even at home, Indian manufacturers have fallen behind over the years. At least 90% of the Indian smartphone market is captured by foreign brands, the vast majority being Chinese brands. Indian brands are only found in the sub-100 market, and in cars, foreign brands and joint ventures have a 75% share of the market. Half of all cars in India are actually Japanese. China will continue to dominate the future of manufacturing for one simple reason: the incredible ecosystem it has built. China doesn't just manufacture products at a cheaper price point, but it controls the entire supply chain and manages every step of the entire process. For example, China is the world's largest cotton producer, while India is number 2, and quite close to China in total production. However, China has a competitive advantage and does more with less, as China uses only 1/4 as much land as India. And it also has additional factories that supply the dyes, buttons, and zippers to produce any type of textile in the world. Such mastery of the supply chain is the secret behind China's success. This graph shows the manufacturing wages in China. We can clearly see wages have grown over the last 2 decades, a whopping 7-fold increase since 2004. And during this time, China steadily increased its manufacturing, first surpassing Japan in 2007, and then the US and Europe a few years later. So it's not all about the cheap labor. When Prime Minister Narendra Modi got elected the first time in 2014, there was a big campaign called Make in India. However, in this chart that examines India's GDP components, we can see the blue line of manufacturing has remained stagnant with a little to almost no growth in the past 30 years. Another important point to notice is that China's central government has full control of nationwide economic policies, while giving local authorities a certain degree of autonomy. India, on the other hand, has a federal system in which the central government has little control over local policies. This explains the stagnation of India's manufacturing sector despite Modi's grand Made in India dream. In 2023, China became the world's #1 automobile exporter and dominates many industries that will be vital to the future, including electric vehicles, solar panels, and artificial intelligence. Not just technology, 35% of clothes are made in China. Over 50% of furniture and toys are manufactured in China. Even the footwear and travel industries are reliant on China, with over 65 and 70% of production coming from China. The problem in India right now is that manufacturing is often restricted to low-end assembly. Apple's operation in India is a great example of what's happening. On the surface, iPhone manufacturing in India has risen significantly over the last 2 years, but most operations for Apple in India are known as FATP, a labor-intensive process performed with components that are imported directly from China. Thus, the value added by India's manufacturing is actually very small. India's dependence on China is also immense in the pharmaceutical sector. 75% of the raw materials needed to make pharmaceutical drugs are imported directly from China. India's software and service sector is booming, but to progress, it needs to build more than just apps. More money should go to science research and making things, not just services. When it comes to patents, India actually ranks quite low, and it's no surprise that China leads the world. Rather than providing corporate welfare to foreign companies, India's goal should be to make the market attractive, so that foreign companies would eagerly set up factories in India. As the world races towards the automation-fueled industry, China's grip on industrial robots, consuming nearly half the global market, grants it a formidable head start over India and others. It's very hard to get anything done in India, as people can protest and stop the progress of any important project easily. While India has a huge reservoir of young people, there are numerous problems with the labor force. One major problem is that the labor force participation rate among women is only 25%, thus depriving the economy of a vast number of workers. Also, India's tax system is even more complex, and it's no wonder why these inefficiencies have led to thousands of foreign companies quitting India over the last decade. In conclusion, India, and every other country for that matter, is not going to threaten China's dominance in manufacturing anytime in the near future, at least not for the next 30 years.